All right, hey, that's an appropriate song to introduce my next guest, who he has a book out called Upright Positions. He got George Plimpton to write the foreword for the book, which I will read, I guess, parts of this as an introduction to my next guest. Men like Ron Garver don't enter your life. They always seem to barge in. The circumstances might change, but one thing remains a constant. Men like Ron Garver are truly one in a million. My first encounter with Garver was, in the vernacular, a most fortuitous meeting. The year was 1983, and I had agreed to pen a first-person account of the airline industry. The idea was, as many are, born out of the daily travails that modern man had somehow found himself within. Why was the very notion of flight, of man's body remaining aloft, housed in an elongated aluminum corridor with wings, no less, still a mystery? While science had indubitably cracked the mystery of flight, it was something that man himself could not seem to wrap his mind around. Modern man in flight? As surely as the questions remained, the answers must as steadfastly follow. My first flight, or takeoff, or what people would later refer to as that time you really took off, was inaugurated out of the then-operating Stapleton Airport in Denver. The notion had yet to strike me, but having my journey commence in the mile-high city would, in retrospect, be oddly prescient. I had assumed the role of a male steward on Flight 242, departing at 4:35 and due to arrive at Dulles somewhere at 8:44, the scheduled arrival time. As I maneuvered through the jetway, I felt an eerie sense of enlightenment, like something truly special was destined to occur. I could not place my finger on it, but the feeling hovered over me like an anticipatory halo, not declaring its purpose, but making its presence well known. After the DC-10 mounted the air, my duty as a steward was curtly kick-started. My superior told me in no uncertain terms to ride the galley lift into the stow carriage, where I would find a large behemoth of a server that contained the coach passengers' meals. I stepped into the cramped galley lift and was surprised to find another passenger already aboard. Cunningly handsome, this man stood in front of me and grinned. He introduced himself as Ron Garver, male steward, a veteran of countless flights. He recognized me from a series of commercials that I had filmed in the early 80s for Intellivision. I was pleasantly surprised to hear him recite some of my lines from the advertisements, dialogue that now seems lost to the ravages of time. This man, this whirlwind, this force of nature stood in front of me. He adjusted my clip-on tie and smiled devilishly. "Welcome aboard," Garver intoned. Something came over me hard and fast. The halo's purpose was revealed in a white-hot platinum flash, and I found myself in the throes of a passion that I could not justify. Fast forward 15 minutes. My uniform was a jumbled mess in the corner. The passengers all went hungry, but I was strangely sated. As I lay in my own formless heap, I looked up to see Ron adjusting his uniform and the metallic reflection gleaming off of a serving card. He noticed my gaze and smiled, sensing, I think, my relative vulnerability. "Now you know why they're called the friendly skies, Mr. Plimpton." He confidently stepped out of the galley lift and rolled the cart down a narrow aisle. Upright Positions is an explosive charge, expertly transmuting one man's fecund passions into the staid printed word. One caution, reader: proceed only if your heart and soul are firmly secured and ready for landing. So I guess, well, thank you very much. My guest is Ron Garver, who that was written about by George Plimpton. Thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you for having me, Tom. Thank you.
It's
a pleasure to be here.
Well, those are pretty exciting.
I was deeply touched when George volunteered to do the foreword. I was surprised, in a way. We hadn't been in contact with each other for many years, and I felt a bit shunned because we had had such a close bond for 3 or 4 years. Well, actually longer. Of course, he's very busy, but we had been in touch off and on for probably 12 years, but we had lost touch, and I'm very thankful he wrote that, and those are, and he, of course, is a hero to me as a writer. And writing the book, of course, I borrowed much of his style from knowing him, from talking to him, from reading his material, and yeah, it was very special that he did that, and I will never forget it.
Mm-hmm. Now, the book is called Upright Positions, and its subtitle is
Flying the Erotic Skies.
Okay,
I'm a Ron Garver.
Mm-hmm. And so what led you to go ahead and put down everything that has happened to you into a book?
Well, to be honest, it seems like a dream, all of it. I mean, I have spent the last 16 years of my life as a steward in the airline industry, and I stopped in 1996. I guess you would call it professional burnout. Mm-hmm. It was, and I went through a spiritual crisis at that time. I had been working solidly for all those years, starting in 1982, for several different major commercial airlines, and I really did need to explore my life and where it was going and where it had been, and I started to take stock in what I had been through and the experiences I had as a steward and as a man, working in the airline industry. And I really just started to take notes and kind of keep a mental diary, and that turned into a book, and I can't believe it, but it did, and it just started to become more and more serious, and I got more and more involved, and to be honest with you, I can't believe it, but yeah. It's done, and it's been doing great, and I'm very pleased with the results, and I guess, Tom, it's like a catharsis. It was like I had lived through these experiences, and I was so enmeshed in them, and I was so involved in them, I had no perspective. And when I stopped that, I began to become circumspect about what I had been through, and I think that's when the writer in me was born.
Because it is kind of, I guess, when you're in the moment, you don't realize...
You don't, and I'm not saying that everybody in the world is going to write a book. People who are involved in their lives, in their jobs, in their occupations, in their circumstances. Not everyone will do what I did, but it really did get me through what was I think, a spiritual crisis and a personal and an emotional crisis in my life. And it's been an awakening now, and it's been wonderful and different and weird, but in the end, I think I'm a better person and a bigger person for having left what I did, learn about what I did, what I had been through, excuse me, and write the book.
Now, what led you to the airline industry? What was the initial attraction?
Well, to be honest with you, I was pretty much fresh out of high school, and I was a young man, and I wanted to travel. I wanted to experience new things, new people, and I wanted to wear the uniform, and that was something that.
So was flying a life? Did it have an appeal to you as a child?
Well, I think it has a basic appeal to everybody. Everybody as a youth admires pilots and people who work in the sky, people who have the ability to do that crazy thing called flying, which is, so it's almost unreal. It's certainly surreal that, and I think now we're jaded to that fact that flying is just something that's a natural occurrence now, and we don't appreciate how strange and wonderful it is. And I think that was an appeal to me. Of course, I was young, and I was ready to get involved with anything, and spread my wings.
Okay. Now, I guess that's all. That's an interesting for the backstory of it. But the book is called "Flying the Erotic Skies," and there's a subtitle.
Well, I had, yes, and it's none too subtle in the title, and I felt that was I mean, that's really what the book is about. And I mean, it is about my personal evolution and my personal story. But it's also has underpinnings of the politics of the airline industry, and part of those politics are, a lot of those politics are sexual.
Now, I guess
and what I experienced after taking on my job was beyond belief.
I guess a lot of people would be shocked at the level of sexuality that takes place in the book. I should say, first of all, my guest is Ron Garver, the author of Upright Positions, Flying the Erotic Skies. And but getting back to my point is that, like, the average person who just flies on a flight,
completely unaware of what's happening, and it's no secret amongst people who work in the airline industry, but and for the stewards and for the pilots and for the grounds crew and everybody across the board. But to the normal traveler, it's fairly well concealed.
So it's like this. It's kind of like this underbelly of the flight industry. And there's this, you say
it's not
grounds crew and
it's not to say that everybody is involved in the practice of rampant sexuality, but there are many main players in this, and I think it comes from the pilots and the controllers first, and then it makes its way down to some of the lesser employees within the industry, and it's really beyond belief, Tom.
At what?
And I mean, this, of course, is my personal story. I want to make that particularly clear. This is not an indictment of the airline industry. It is one man's story within that, and if you are to interpret some negative things within that, then that's your interpretation.
Now, at what point did you get initiated into this world? Because if you just had come on as a flight attendant, you didn't sign on to be a steward.
Well,
looking for this type of
no, it's true, and it's like anything else. When you become part of a different world, you're more vulnerable, and so I think I was willing to participate, and I think people in the airline industry prey on that, and I was also, like I said, very young, so in that regard I was vulnerable as well, and I was experiencing a sexual awakening in my own life. I was in my early 20s. I was ready to experiment, and I did not know that the forum for that experimentation would be so devastating and so all-consuming.
Now, I mean, can you get a little more specific on your first initiation into this world?
Well, there's so much, and there's so many stories. I had my first sexual encounter with a co-pilot, and that was on my first flight, which was from Dallas-Fort Worth to Reno. And part of the steward's job, of course, is also to serve the pilots. And of course, there's a strange power dynamic between pilots and everyone, not just stewards, but passengers. We're all in the hands of the pilot.
Yeah.
He controls the plane. And it was, of course, my job, and it's not so unspoken, that I am to do the bidding of the pilot and the co-pilot. They are the first to be served, and I did serve them. We of course served them food. We served them drinks. And this is not to say that I was in some ways complicit in this first encounter. I mean, I was sexually attracted to this man, and we had an immediate spark. And it happened so fast, Tom, that I couldn't even believe it was happening. It was immediate, and it was passionate, but it was too strange to really even understand what was going on. It was just like, and the strangest part was it was in a plane.
Where in the plane was it?
In the area between the pilot compartment and the first class cabin.
Really? Wow, that's not a
which is mostly occupied by, we called it the kitchenette.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like such a discrete area of a plane. I mean,
well, you'd be surprised. I mean, many people during a flight aren't really paying attention to what's going on. I mean, everybody's involved in their own thing. Many people are reading magazines or books or watching the onboard the in-flight movie or having a drink or in the midst of conversation, and things like this can happen without really anybody being privy to it.
Now, after that first encounter, was it just like the scales were lifted from your eyes and you were just?
Well, I had no idea that it was going to become such a standard thing, and I had no idea it was going to be a constant. I thought this was a strange, bizarre fling that was a one-time thing, and little did I know that I was really being initiated into what was this world of unbelievable sexuality that would consume my life for the next 12, 14 years.
Yeah, and so
And of course, it was all in flight, which was the strangest thing.
Now, what is the appeal for there to be such a sexually charged environment on an airplane? I mean, what is there some special appeal? Why is it just in the airport?
I do address this in the book, and I think there is something about flying that is so dynamic and so strange that you are being propelled into a different world with different rules and the rules of the land, of the earth, don't really apply. It's like a parallel universe. I find it to be akin to like ancient Rome in a way. It's like there's a decadence to it. There's a freedom to it. You're flying. I mean, you're actually flying, and in that respect, I think that people's guards go down, and of course, there's a lot of nervous tension with flying, and so you have this whole amalgam of emotions and feelings which are coursing through you, and I think part of it is the excitement of it, excuse me, and the other part is there's some fear, and you express that combination and sometimes you use sexuality to. So
it's like a domino effect almost, just that one.
A little bit, yes.
Okay.
It's hard to describe the psychology of it unless you're there, and well, I'm sure you've flown.
I've flown, but I guess if you're someone who's flying constantly, that's a different world than somebody who is an occasional traveler.
And I found that after working in the industry for so long, you become inducted into this world of complete sexuality, and sexuality becomes an obsession in the air. And I became a sexual predator, not unlike the people who taught me. So I became a product of my environment in the air, and I in turn expressed that same thing. It was like a nurturing process, and I became like that.
Okay.
And I began to possess that, and I changed from that, and I in turn expressed all my fears and all my excitements through pure sexuality, and it's quite an experience.
My guest is author Ron Garver, author of the book Upright Positions, Flying the Erotic Skies. And one question I wanted to ask you was, once you were in this world, was every flight, was there a sexual escapade on every flight, or was it every other flight? Or how often did stuff go on?
You never knew at the time. Although flights became, to me, a breeding ground for sex. I began pursuing sex in the air. So at first, very haphazard. It wasn't, of course, every flight. But toward the end of my career, the last, I would say, 8-10 years, I was having sexual relations in some fashion on every flight I flew.
Wow. And how many flights were you flying in a week?
Thousands.
Mm-hmm. Like, would you fly in a week? You'd fly every day?
We would do a 4-day week.
Okay.
And that included sometimes 2 to 3 flights a day. Mm-hmm. And that was domestic. Wow. I did international flight when I worked for a particular airline, which I cannot mention. Of course, I cannot mention any of the airlines I worked for. Yeah, that's
actually I was going to ask you about.
But they're all the major airlines, which, of course, you're aware of. And I did do international flights for one particular airline, and that was even more extreme because the flights were longer and there was more time to pursue sex. And when you're on a 1-hour flight, mm-hmm. like a Dallas-Reno, of course the opportunity for sex is much less.
Yeah.
But when you are on a LA-Paris flight, I could sometimes have between 8 and 10 sexual encounters
on one flight.
Yes.
Wow,
Now, granted, at this time, of course, I was pretty much a man possessed. I mean, I was in the throes of what I now realize as it was a psychosis. Mm-hmm. It was dysfunctional, mm-hmm. and I was in a different state of mind. I was there for the sex. I existed for that sex, and I requested more flights. I had at one point gone to 5, sometimes 6 days a week, just in order to secure more sex.
So it's almost like the movie Taxi Driver, in the fact, like when he was just out of his mind and was just taking double shift just to be on the.
Yes, of course. None of these experiences ended in murder or suicide.
Okay, it was pretty much just kept within the sexual arena.
I would hope. Mm-hmm. I mean, I do know of one man who I had several encounters with, who was a captain of industry who did commit suicide about 4 years ago. He was
not on board a flight, though.
Not on board a flight, okay. And I would hope that these encounters that I had with him were not the contributing factor mm-hmm. in his death, and I don't think they were. I mean, he was chairman of a major corporation, and I assume that carried with it
its own burdens.
Of course, yeah.
Now
that's the only death that I'm aware of.
My guest is author Ron Garver, author of the new book Upright Positions: Flying the Erotic Skies. Would you want to read a passage from your book?
Of course, yeah. I do want to say that the book has been doing quite well, and it's been a whirlwind of radio shows and mm-hmm. and appearances, and it's been crazy. And I actually today we just got a write-up in Aviation Weekly, which the gentleman, the critic, called me the Henry Miller of the air, which
wow,
I found, which was a treat.
Yeah, that's complimentary.
It really is, because he's another, mm-hmm. along with many other authors who I love, he's definitely a favorite of mine. Mm-hmm. But yes, of course, I would love to. I would read a portion. I brought the book. So this is from chapter 2.
Okay.
His tongue was like a hot, moist metal detector, scouring my body for hidden riches, and he found them. He put his... I can't read that.
Okay, yeah, obviously.
Well, some of the portions of the book are very racy, and
mm-hmm.
that part I cannot read.
Okay.
I'll move.
Okay, thank you.
His mouth was like a lamprey, attaching itself to me, living from me, sucking, constantly sucking, until I felt as I would die of unbridled ecstasy. As I stood in the aft, Yeah. Okay. That's another. I can't read that passage, Tom.
Okay.
Let me skip forward here. Unfortunately, many of the the book, of course, is a retelling of some of these experiences I had, and some of them are very graphic. Mm-hmm. So I can't necessarily read.
I'd rather you err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
In terms of...
I don't want to say good taste, but of course on the radio there are different rules, and I abide by them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Their hands were sculpting me as if I were clay, and they were master potters, creating me from a lifeless lump into a treasured piece of art. In the end, I was glazed and hardened, and my pleasure was burning in the kiln of their passions, even though I could barely sustain the temperature of our desire. Despite there was no room to move. Yeah, that's also a no-go. So I can't read.
Okay. I mean, is there a passage where...
I'm trying to find a passage where I could get some sort of flow going.
Yeah.
His member was like a blind man's cane, sweeping back and forth, always probing, guiding, protecting, giving him the ability to move forward without fear of bumping into anything that might get in his way, until he bumped into me. His fingertips felt me all over, as if I were the greatest piece of literature the world has to offer, written in Braille. I can't read that. I'm sorry, Tom.
I understand. It's a pretty
I'm glad
daunting task.
There's a moment where I become so involved in the reading of my book that sometimes I'm glad right now I'm catching myself.
Yes. Thank you.
Let's scroll down to here. Okay, that page is impossible to read. Here we go. We were like Sherpa, an adventurer, climbing the highest peak of sensuality by working together in orgasmic symbiosis. Each step with his crampon into my glacier, a step toward immortality. As the elevation of lovemaking got higher, the air of resistance got thinner, and I could no longer stop him from his quest to conquer the highest peak of passion. I could only serve him as a good Sherpa would. Why did he climb me? Because I was there. And that's where I'm going to have to stop on that one. Okay. Down to... That's Flight 1368. That's this one I can read a portion of.
Okay.
As he pushed his Republican agenda deep inside me, I tried to muster enough dissenting votes, but his message was too strong. It was a sexual filibuster, and I was powerless to veto his executive order. And that order was to make my orgasm the best orgasm ever. All those in favor, say aye. The ayes have it. And that actually ends a chapter, so okay. I can...
Well, thank you. I guess that's...
I do have a... Oh, this is a part I can read.
Okay.
This is from chapter 4. I didn't make the seating arrangements. The airlines made the seating arrangements. Your travel agent made the seating arrangements. If I could put everyone in first class, I would, but I can't. If there were seats open, I had no problem moving a passenger who wanted more room. But if there was not, if the flight was full, I couldn't make miracles happen. Many people didn't understand this.
Okay, so that I guess that is not really a...
That was more of an observation and part. Of course, not all the stories and the retelling of the stories were sexual in content. I mean, some of them, of course, had to do with my job and my daily routine and what I had to do. I wasn't. I mean, don't get me wrong. I wasn't having sex constantly. Yeah. I did perform my duties, and I was awarded the Employee of Merit several times. So I was a successful steward.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you maintained your job for as long as you did, you would have to be.
Oh, here's one I can read. Actually,
okay.
I'm just noticing. My body was like a dartboard, and he was like the world's dart-throwing champion. Every gentle toss of his arm led to a bullseye, a sexual bullseye.
Well, that's I
particularly like that.
That's a pretty nice metaphor, I guess.
For someone who really had no formal training in writing, what I did do was I took classes.
Mm-hmm.
Once I decided I was going to write the book, I did take some introductory writing classes at an adult education center, and I read. I mean, that's really, and I do have my teacher Marvin Kempler to thank for that. He said the best thing a writer can do is read.
I've heard that. Yeah, that's my guest is author Ron Garver, the author of the new book Upright Positions: Flying the Erotic Skies. Would you be interested in taking some phone calls?
Yes, that's why I'm here, to reach people.
Okay, well, the phone number is 201-200-9368, and you can also email questions at toms@wfmu.org. Now, one point which came up I thought was an interesting development was with all of the sexual activity going on. What was it like when you would get off the plane? I mean, when you would.
Well, I like to describe it that it's akin to a drug addiction. It was a sexual addiction, but a very specific type of sexual addiction. It was a airline-oriented sexual addiction.
So this did
which
not
is different, and you have there is. I know people who I've had sex with people who were sex addicts, but it's not the same thing. It was almost occupational. It was like a combination of being a sex addict, sex obsessed, in a very contained environment, like not unlike I would think war.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, it was like it had its own atmosphere.
Okay.
You took in a different type of oxygen. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively.
Okay.
And so I like to describe it as something between being at war and being sexually addicted.
Okay.
In war.
Mm-hmm. So, but what were the faces when people who you had encounters with? I mean,
well, I became so adept at getting sex as a steward. I mean, number one, I do have I have a certain natural attraction to people, and people are naturally attracted to me. There's no doubt about it. I think there is just a basic physical quality.
Yeah.
That exists, but there's something, like I said before, and I tried to describe it to you. It's better described in the book, but it's about being a steward and you being a passenger.
Okay.
And I knew who I was going to have sex with pretty much my first pass through the cabin.
Okay.
And I picked these people out very particularly. I became tuned in to who I was going to have sex with and who I could have sex with,
okay.
and it pretty much was without fail.
Mm-hmm. You want to take a call?
Certainly.
WFMU, you're on the air. FMU, you're on the air. Oh, that one didn't work. Let's try. WFMU, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm listening to this interview. This sounds fantastic, this book. And I'm just wondering, at one point the author mentions how it's their hands touching me, right?
Yes.
And so implying it was a group scenario. Now, was there any women involved, or is it just all men that you're doing this with, or?
Well, I'm a gay man, but I like to consider myself pansexual, and there were experiences with women. Certainly stewardesses fell prey to the same desires that I had, and we were all in the same boat, so to speak. I guess we were in the same plane.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And we, and so, yes, there was rampant sex between pilots and stewardesses, and there was rampant sex between pilots and co-pilots, male and female. There was rampant sex between pilot, co-pilot, steward, and stewardess. And so it really crossed what we consider to be normal sexual boundaries. Mm-hmm. And there was sex between stewardesses and passengers. There was sex between stewards and passengers, male and female. So it really did run the gamut.
So it really plays into what you were saying earlier about when you were up in the air.
When you're up in the air,
all bets are off.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay, we got
So
that.
yes, ma'am, to answer your question in as brief terms as possible, yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, you are listening to WFMU. You are listening to WFMU East Orange, WXHD Mount Hope, worldwide on the internet at WFMU.org. My special guest is author Ron Garver, author of the book Upright Positions, Flying the Erotic Skies. WFMU, you're on the air.
Hi, I have a question for Mr. Garber. Now, you say that you've done it like thousands of times. I would think eventually you probably got caught, right? And if you did you get in trouble, or what happened when you got caught in the act? I mean, you must have.
Well, yes. I mean,
have you gotten caught?
I have, and I had been caught. Of course, amongst pilots and people who worked in the plane, there was a certain unspoken law of secrecy. It was like a skull and bones, like a sort of a secret society of sex. And so there was definitely not, there wasn't really any type of pointing out people and bringing out what happened to, let's say, the powers that be in the airlines, because that was not an issue. There were some certain times when passengers would take issue with the sex, and that did create some problems. But most of the time,
so they would take issue with
the fact that they, let's say, witnessed a sexual act on the plane, or, for instance, walked into a lavatory and saw a steward and a pilot making love. And that would be awkward. But oftentimes what would happen would be that 20 to 30 minutes later, that passenger was as well having sex with the pilot.
So was that a way of covering up indiscretions like that? Was to be inclusive with the?
Well, I don't think it was a matter of covering up. I think it was just that people became so susceptible to what was happening, that it was so spur of the moment. If you did happen to wander in on a sexual act or an encounter, somehow you became part of it. And I'm not saying that this was the norm, but that did happen. Mm-hmm. And there were several trysts between pilots, passengers, and stewards. So and these were, of course, not planned ahead of time. These were situations where a passenger would stumble on it, and then become a part of it.
Okay.
It was like a Plato's retreat in the sky.
In the sky, yeah.
And you'd be surprised how many people are susceptible to that type of behavior in a spur of the moment situation.
Because I guess you have a lot of businessmen and businesswomen who are.
Well, all of these people, of course. Now, granted, my book really takes place in the 80s. And in the 80s, the airlines were deregulated under Reagan and Bush. And in the 80s had an air of decadence to it. And there was a certain sexuality that was running rampant through society. And I'm not a political writer, and I don't draw these type of comparisons, but I think that had something to do with it. I think people were doing these type of things that you're not aware of them now because it's a different environment. Mm-hmm. It's a different sexual environment.
Yeah. Okay, we got another call coming in here. WFMU, you're on the air.
Hey, I have a question for Mr. Garver.
Yes.
Obviously, contact with these passengers has to be done in a subtle way, And, I know when I'm on a plane, I never really realize these things are going on, which obviously, based on the revelations tonight, they are constantly happening. So I wanted to ask Mr. Garver what's a usual initiation of contact with a passenger to let him know the path he wishes to.
That's a very good question.
That's a great question.
And there was a certain my particular approach was that I would of course have to do my first walk through a cabin, and like I said before, I would pick out people who I had an immediate attraction to, and I picked out those people in order to eventually try and solicit sex from them or engage in sex.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, of course this has nothing to do with exchanging of money. This is all people's free will.
Absolutely.
So I would first make eye contact. That was the first thing. And it's just like if you're at a party and you see someone and you look at them and they look back, there's a certain spark that happens, and I was just keenly aware of that. And
but how do you go from not misinterpreting that to where you just, how do you walk that line? Because that would be a pretty...
Well, initial eye contact was the most important factor to begin, to initiate this. And then it became really, there wasn't a playbook. I didn't have, the rules of the game. I would approach them first.
Okay.
I would sort of kind of single them out. And I would maybe just, fix their seat, offer them a pillow, offer them a blanket first.
Okay.
Before really the plane had even left the gate. And I would make...
So you were planting the seed.
I plant seeds right away, so that by the time the flight had reached its peak elevation, I was probably ready to have sex with them.
And you're letting them kind of like letting their
yes, and like anybody else,
you
have to understand that when you're on a plane, and people can now, after reading the book or even after hearing this, people can get on a plane, and this still does happen. Of course, I don't think it is as serious and as widespread as it was, but you can sense it. You can, for yourself as a passenger, look at your steward or look at your stewardess, and you can get a sensation that there is something there that's about to happen. And sometimes your resistance, is strong, and you don't pursue that. But at the time, I made it quite clear.
Okay. My guest is Ron Garver, author of the book Upright Positions, Flying the Erotic Skies. Now, that's a good point. This might be an improper question, but is there just like a go-to move that a passenger can make time after, like an ironclad move that says to a steward or stewardess, I'm interested in some sort of encounter?
A passenger or the steward?
That a passenger could make to a steward.
I've never encountered it that way, Tom.
Okay.
I've always been the pursuer.
Okay.
And my go-to move was tour of the plane, which is what I would call it. Which would be I would either, let's say that passenger had to go to the lavatory, I would escort him to the lavatory. Or let's say that passenger had a special, and a lot of this stuff took place almost arbitrarily.
Okay.
I would make first contact with a passenger, and then, for instance, that passenger would express his or her interest by, let's say, singling me out and saying, do you have pretzels? Do you have nuts?
Okay. So
and now I know that there is it's been upped a notch. And now I will say, perhaps, yes, I do. I have pretzels. Shall I bring you some? Or shall I bring you to the pretzels?
Oh, or so let me get them actually out of their seat and...
Yes. And so this happens very fast. And it's, and so it's hard to describe a particular type because, a particular game plan, because there was none.
WFMU, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm enjoying the show tonight. It's some interesting conversation, and it made me think of a story that's been in the news recently, because you always hear about how people who are on these long airplane flights get sick because so much of the air is recirculated. There's not a lot of fresh air up there.
It's very true. It's very true. I was constantly sick in my and I always had something like a sinus thing that was haunting me for 16 years. So
but I wonder if this syndrome may have worked in your favor, because I couldn't help thinking as you were describing the almost epidemic nature of the encounters, that maybe something was getting recirculated through the air that was kind of tipping off these other passengers in some subconscious way to what was happening.
Well, I'm not one for conspiracy theories, and I don't think there is a unless they're putting some sort of herbal formula that promotes sex. I don't know. It's possible. I don't think so, though. That would be far-fetched. I mean, I think that we as human beings try to explain things in different ways, and we try to attribute things, but I think it's just the idea is that was the time, that was the place, and sex was the name of the game.
The phone number is 201-200-9368 if you have a question or comment for author Ron Garver.
And I do want to say there are serious repercussions to this, because as many people don't know, I mean, a lot of this seems like it didn't have implications, but it did. And I think many, and of course I'm hard-pressed to prove this, but I was there, and many airline disasters have been caused by sex.
You mean actual in-flight accidents?
Yes. This is the truth, and there have been many planes that have gone down that have been attributed to mechanical failure or pilot error. And when you read in the paper pilot error,
so that's like a code word?
It's not code. It's not code, but it is what the airlines do release to the press.
I mean, that's a pretty wild assertion, especially.
Well, my point is, Tom, this is not across the board, but there have been, and I am very well aware of this, several airline accidents that were caused by pilots who were having sex while flying. That's
and
shocking. That is scary.
It's scary to think that someone's.
And I'm thankful I'm alive today. Of course, I wasn't flying the plane, but I was part of this, and I was complicit in certain and sexual liaisons that definitely had an effect on the flight course of the plane.
Wow!
I had been in one particular encounter where we lost an engine because of a sexual encounter in the cockpit.
Wow! I mean, this is
and that was easily the scariest moment.
That is
of my life, and that really did, and that was quite recently. That was in 1992, and that's when I really started to question what was happening and what I was doing, and what these pilots were doing, and what everyone was doing.
I mean, so that's an industry-wide known secret?
Not everybody does know this.
Okay.
But there's a certain percentage of people who work for the airlines who are involved in this type of behavior that are well aware of this, and it's nobody is doing anything to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to realize that it's a pretty shocking claim to put out there.
Well, it is. It is. I do document it in the book, and I actually did bring tapes.
Okay, yeah, you did give me a tape.
And as an employee of some of the major commercial airlines, I did have access to some of the CVRs, which is the cockpit voice recorder.
Okay.
And most of the airlines archives their CVR.
Yeah, I guess that's
and they put them onto a mainframe.
Is that black? That's the black box.
It's called the black box.
Okay.
It's what the layperson would call the black box. It's officially called the CVR, and the CVR tapes are sometimes used for training, and so the airlines do archive the CVR tapes, and I was able to actually get some and access some of the actual tapes from some of the pilots, and it's quite condemning. And I like I said, I'm not on a crusade. But I do think that certain changes need to be made in the airline industry that can prevent accidents from happening due to sexual
carelessness, I guess.
Yeah.
And do you want to? I guess
certainly. And this is just a small example of some of the things that do go on. And I of course I didn't have access to everything. I can't.
Okay, so let's run this and see what happens.
It's quite disturbing.
Okay, here.
3000 American 539, Delta 191 heavy, traffic 10 o'clock, mile 100, unverified. All right, thank you. American 539, reduced speed 170, turbulence, you'll be following heavy TriStar. 170 on airspeed American 539, Delta 191 heavy is 6 miles from the mark. 100 cleared for ILS, 17 left approach, Delta 19er 1 Roger. Okay. All right. American 539, turn left 230. 230, American 539. 160 is your speed. Delta 550, 7, reduced speed to 70. 170 Delta, 55-7. And we're getting some variable winds out there due to some short out there and a DFW. Yeah, American 530, turn left 220, stuff moving in. Roger that. 220 American 539, Delta 160 is 1 heavy, reduced speed at 12655, and we'll pick you up on the flip side. 12655, thank you. Oh, Jesus. Get in. Get your lever. Move your leg. Move your leg. Move your leg, please. Move your leg up. Oh, boy. Roger that. There's a little grapefruit in it, huh?
No.
Cranberry.
Yeah, you saw that from the color?
What else is in it? Sprite, huh?
Diet Sprite. And I guess you could do with Sprite, probably a little better if...
Yeah, is there any more?
Cranberry, orange, and Diet Sprite.
Really nice, thank you.
It's different.
Yeah, I always mix cranberry and the grapefruit. That's what I like. Yeah.
Okay, back to work.
Sweet and sour. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's terrifying stuff. I guess and those are all that's real.
That's real CVR. That's real black box recordings, and it's. I played those tapes for my publisher. Actually, my publisher read the book, and he vomited.
Based on that?
Well, it was partially from the book and from the tapes and from some of the language in the book and from the writing. But he said but I vomited in a good way.
Wow, that's I guess that's
like the type of vomiting that comes when you have stomach poisoning, and it's a total relief.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, I mean, of course he loves the book and he's in total support of it, but stuff like that, what you just heard, Tom, it really is a powerful indictment on certain members of the airline industry who are acting it's dangerous, who are acting dangerously and risking other people's lives without concern.
That's the line, I guess, that if it is crossed, you're jeopardizing everybody else's life who's not involved in the escapades.
Well, hearing those tapes are still, it's almost like I'm there, and I was.
So that's just how it was.
That was not me. By the way.
No, but those
are familiar. That atmosphere is very familiar to me, and it's and hearing it still gives me shivers that I was involved in that type of behavior and that type of destructive behavior, which I now know to be destructive behavior. Of course, note that I would not take any of it back. Mm-hmm. I would not want to do anything differently that I had lived in those years, and I lived through it. I'm better having lived through that.
WFMU, you're on the air.
Yes, am I on the air?
Yes, you are.
I am a veteran. I have flown for 17 years for the American Airlines, for United Airlines. I don't know who this man is that is on the radio now. I'm listening on the internet, but I can assure you that this man is a charlatan. This man is a charlatan. There is no way that he would have access to those CVRs. I can tell you that in my 17 years, I never encountered anything about what this man is saying.
Well, that's clearly not true, sir. And look, I have the utmost respect for pilots. I think they're doing an amazing job. Most of them are. Like I said before, this isn't an indictment.
You are clearly attempting to fabricate. I am so enraged that I cannot even express.
Well, sir, this is my story, and I have a right to tell it. And I'm sure you're aware of what
this is fiction. Fiction. I am a. Not only am I a pilot, I am a pilot trainer. I do training for pilots at commercial airlines.
Well, then you must be quite well aware of what I'm talking about.
That is absolutely a lie.
So you have never heard of any of this type of activity going on in the air?
100% absolutely not.
Well, I'll tell you something, sir. If you are a pilot for major airlines,
I was a pilot for 17 years.
If you were a pilot,
Airlines and American Airlines.
If you were a pilot for American Airlines,
I was a veteran of the Air Force for 2 years.
That is fine. That is fine. If you were a pilot for American Airlines and United Airlines, I would be extremely surprised to realize that you have no idea what I'm talking about.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. I am an ATOP training facilitator. This is absolutely untrue. There is no way that man would have access to the CVRs.
Well, sir, you know that's not true because I did get the CVR tapes from the archives, and believe me, that's not standard practice.
Okay, who is the host? Because I can tell you, I can assure you that a steward, okay, who is the lowest person, a male steward within the airline industry, is the lowest person on the totem pole.
That's not necessary.
He is lower than the GACs. Okay?
That's not necessary, sir.
No, it is absolutely the truth.
And I take personal offense.
Well, the point is, he would never have access to the training tapes.
I mean, anybody could have.
That's absolutely not true.
What you just heard.
Have you ever been on a training facility?
Well, sir, I've seen them.
You've seen a training facility?
Yes, I have. Of course, I was not.
Have you ever held an official position on a training facility?
Of course not, sir. I was a steward.
Yes, okay, that is exactly my point.
But so how is it that he couldn't get access to tapes? I mean...
Because you have to be certified as a trainer and undergo in tremendous scrutiny before you have access to these tapes. There's an entire process.
A pilot gave me those tapes, sir.
Well, that is just unspeakably offensive.
Well, it may have gone around the rules, but it may
have gone around the rules.
It may help to save lives.
I'll tell you, I will find this book of yours, and I will find your name, and you will be prosecuted.
Let me ask you a question, sir. Have you ever had a sexual encounter in a plane when you were a pilot for United or American?
Well, that is a ridiculous question.
Is it?
Yes.
It is.
Yes, it is.
What would be the answer, though?
Well, what is I have never had sex while operating an airplane. Never. We've never had sex in never.
While operating?
That is correct.
But I mean, there are pilots who hop on board flights who aren't operating the airplane.
And many times, Tom, the pilots aren't actively operating the plane for 70 to 80% of the flight.
Of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
When it's on autopilot, sir.
No, the plane is you know I don't even know if you're a steward, because you don't simply put the plane on autopilot. These are tons of steel flying through the air.
I mean, everybody understands that the takeoff and the landing are.
Never have I had a single sexual encounter during a takeoff or landing.
Well, no, that's not the area.
I'm talking about in-flight,
discussion.
sir. I'm talking about in-flight.
When the plane is, if you were taking like a New York to Los Angeles flight, there's just a lot of just letting the thing drive itself.
And your point is?
Is this foreign information to you completely, sir? It sounds like.
I mean, in the guest's defense,
the instances of sexual relations involving pilots on airlines are almost completely non-existent.
Almost completely.
Now,
completely.
If I can just say, it seems vague, kind of like you're tap dancing around certain things. You're saying not during takeoff, not during landing, and then you're kind of clouding points. I mean, have you ever had anything that would resemble this steward's Mr. Garver's book? Any activity like that at any point during a flight?
I do not know how you're defining,
Well, just anything.
Sexual...
Have you ever just had any encounter that would be considered sexual at any point during a flight?
Well, I mean, there's it's a question of definition. It's a question of definition.
Well, it seems like.
I don't know. I mean, there has been instances where
where you did have sex.
Never went during a takeoff or a landing have I ever engaged in any such activity, and I can assure you.
While the plane was in flight, you have had sexual encounters in the way that I was describing them.
I have never, ever, ever, ever had sex with another man.
Well, that's fine, sir, and that's to each his own. But what I'm talking about has nothing to do with sexual proclivity.
Homosexual activity on an airplane.
But
that is just disgusting beyond comprehension.
But if you take the word homosexual out of that, have you ever had any heterosexual activity during a flight?
Full-on sexual activity?
Or just any type, anything that falls under the umbrella of sexual activity.
Well, I don't know. I've had experiences that would be considered, schoolboy situations.
What does that mean, schoolboy? Petting, fondling, kissing?
Petting, fondling, yes.
But I see.
Kissing.
During flight.
Never during the landing or.
Okay,
you've repeated yourself way too many times, sir.
All right.
There has been an occasion where, because of a pre-existing relationship that I had developed with a stewardess and at one time a female navigation officer, where we did engage in pre-copulation.
Okay.
Well, I guess.
And how about with passengers?
There was a couple of narrow situations with passengers that
I understand, sir. You know what? This was as difficult for me to come clean on as it is for many of the people who are involved.
It's a very...
I understand.
The problem is that we are desperately attempting to get the FAA to make changes to make airline safety safer. And this type of
I think that's important, but I think
rumor mongering and finger pointing.
Well, sir, it seems to me
and discrediting.
It seems to me
completely inappropriate.
It seems to me that you are party to some of these experiences that I was talking about, which you initially denied.
Never with a man.
Well, no, that's not. I think that's beside the point.
It really is besides the issue.
There was one instance where there was another man involved, but we did not do any of the touching.
Okay. Look, nobody's...
I just feel like, speaking for captains,
like I said before, sir, I'm not here to...
That's the thing you don't understand.
I'm
Being
not...
a pilot, people...
I understand the stress of the job,
and
I was there.
That people have to the pilot.
I know, and you're in a very closed space.
You're in a very close space, but you don't understand what it's like being a pilot. And
well, sir, I was there, and I do
being
understand.
A rock star.
I know that, and I do understand, and I'm sure.
And stewardesses, that is what they do. That is what they do.
Mm-hmm.
They zero in on the pilot.
Okay, well,
and it's hard to say no to that.
It's virtually impossible.
And it's certainly hard to say no to passengers who also offer themselves.
Well, of course. I mean, the passengers, you have their life in their hands, so it's akin to a doctor-patient relationship.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, that's odd, and it's an odd comparison. However, I will say, like I said before, sir, I'm not here to crucify individuals. I'm here to tell the story.
I just think what you're doing is just terribly irresponsible.
But I'm very happy to know that you did come clean about your story.
And you are acknowledging that there is, I mean, I understand you might be hesitant to, but there are certain things that are taking place in the air with pilots and with stewards and stewardesses.
It's my sincere belief that does not continue to this day.
Okay.
There was a period where it was
And that's what's documented in Mr. Garver's book.
Well, that book sounds like a witch hunt.
But that's okay. Well, thank you for calling. Well, I guess time is kind of tight here. I just had one more question for you, if I could. I obviously,
I'm not surprised that this is creating some waves of discontent amongst people in my industry or in what was my industry. I now fly only charter flights, private flights. I do not work for the commercial airlines anymore, and I don't think they would invite me back into their world. But I can understand how this would create some problems for some of the people who are involved, and because it's disturbing information, no question.
Oh yeah, and it's shocking to a lot of people who this is like a bomb getting dropped on them, just the regular customer of an airline.
Yes, and it's true that the regular customer of an airline should look out for this. And I'm not saying do not have sex with a steward, do not have sex with a stewardess, do not have sex with a pilot or a co-pilot, but try not to have sex with them in flight.
Now, my final question, I guess, the foreword from the book, which I read, I guess you had an encounter with George Plimpton.
That's correct, yes.
And, I mean, what other... it's completely at your liberty to discuss. I mean, what type of, celebrity-wise?
Well,
is that a common occurrence?
Well, yes. I mean, and celebrities travel constantly, and that was part of the job. And certainly there were encounters I had with people who were famous, and I do write about some of them in the book. And I don't want to make it sound like this book is some sort of cheap tell-all. It really is a very personal story about my journey and about my sexual journey and about the airline industry. But there are certain people who I became very close with, and some of those people are famous, and some of those people are not. But I don't mince words to say that I was very close to John Fogerty of Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Okay.
For many years, and as a matter of fact, he wrote a song for me, which was "Put Me in Coach," and that was what many people consider a song about baseball, but it was actually about I was the steward in coach.
So it's a different type. So coach meant something different.
Well, to me it did, but to America, what's funny is it seems like about put me in coach and ready to play today, and that was about my relationship with him, and believe it or not, I love the song, and it honors what we had, and but like I said, these relationships are very dangerous, and people have lives outside of the plane and outside of the flight, and then they enter this world which is me, and so a lot of them are very combustible, no pun intended. With
now, who would be the most famous person you would have?
Well, the list runs into the hundreds, but like I said, John Fogerty, and there were some famous actors. It was Jim Belushi, who I had a couple of encounters with, who is a mean-spirited man, and I don't treasure my time with him at all. And there was the actor Patrick Dempsey, who was a sweet kid and who was around my age, and I hadn't experienced that before. And I actually loved his work in Can't Buy Me Love, and I that was a one-time thing. So, like I said, it runs the gamut.
Okay.
And there was a man who I believe was Senator Dick Cheney, who I gave oral to in a lavatory.
You mean vice president?
He's now vice president. Yeah. He wasn't traveling under the name Dick Cheney. I believe he was a senator at that time, and I'm certain, there is a shadow of a doubt that it was him, but I'm almost sure that we had a very steamy liaison in a
wow.
Yes, a very steamy liaison in a 757 lavatory, and I cannot confirm that. Like I can confirm the others.
Okay.
And I did not write about that in the book, although I alluded to it in the passage I read about the Republican agenda.
Okay. So that was all right. That makes sense.
That was a reference to him, but like I said before, no names were mentioned.
Okay. Well,
there is a full chapter on Fogerty, and my relationship with him is well documented. And
now you said I guess primarily when you're on the ground you're gay, but when you were in the air you said you were pansexual.
Yes.
Were there any famous females that you had encounters with?
Anne Margaret was one woman who I did, but that was not a singular encounter. I was with Anne Margaret, and at the time he was a fairly young actor named Anthony Geary, who played Luke on General Hospital, and that was a three-way situation, which turned into a four-way situation with a pilot.
Okay. Wow.
So yeah.
Wow. So the book. It sounds like a pretty exciting read.
I hope so, and it has been doing well, and I'm not saying it's the easiest book to read. It wasn't the easiest book to write, but I mean it's and some people are saying it's a bit racy and a bit graphic, but look, I mean, I believe in the freedom of words and
absolutely. I mean, it's your life.
And I signed off a copy for you, Tom. So.
Oh wow! Thank you. That's fantastic.
With you. So, and thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming down.
I'm glad I was able to actually tell the breadth of the story, which a lot of these radio stations you come on and they want to hear just about the sex.
Yeah.
And you were very gracious about wanting to hear about some of the other stuff.
I mean, you are a person. That's how.
Well, I appreciate that.
Well,
not to say that the book isn't predominantly sex, but there is an underlying story there, which I hope to be writing about in my next book.
Well, I'd like to thank author Ron Garver for coming in. The book is called Upright Positions. Flying the Erotic Skies, and I guess that's in bookstores now. So thank you very much, Mr. Garver. And I'm going to go to the green room and get my next guest, who I guess time is running out, but hypnotist P.J. Clough will be coming up. Let's hear a record from the band Lightning Bolt in the meantime. Okay, we're actually expecting a call from author Ron Garver, who is going to, this might be it now. I thought that was going to be it, but... WFMU, you're on the air. FMU, you're on the air.
Okay. Great.
WFMU, are you on the air?
Bye-bye.
We're trying to get...
In the meantime, you can call 800-989-9368. 800-989-WFMU. A mere $10 pledge gets you in the running for Peaches. This is Peaches without Gonzalez,
yes.
right?
Hello?
Hello? Oh, hey, WFMU, you're on the air.
Yes, hi, Tom. It's Ron Garver.
Hey, Ron, thanks for calling.
No problem. Always a pleasure.
Now, Ron, you are the author of a book called Upright Positions.
Yes, I was on your show a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Yeah,
And,
about a month ago, actually.
It was a very interesting interview. You,
Well, thank you. It was fun to do, although it's been quite a tumultuous month for me.
what's going on with you, Ron?
Well, after I had done your show, Tom, we had some problems with the book, and sales had been sluggish overall, and then some problems arose with the lawsuit, which I don't want to get into because I don't want necessarily this to be a forum for my angst. I know you're doing your show, so
Yeah, so we're actually in the middle of our fundraiser.
Oh, well, congratulations. I hope that goes well.
Let's hope it goes
Certainly
well.
not going terrific for me, however, but it's not all about me.
I'm sorry to hear it's not going. What's not going well with you?
Well, it's just that a certain celebrity that was mentioned in the book is suing myself and the publisher, Knopf.
And who is that celebrity?
Well, I don't want to necessarily mention who he is, but there was a segment about him in the book, and I had told the story about a certain liaison with him, and which was on a flight from New York to L.A., and I guess he and his powerful legal team takes issue with the validity of that story, even though my aim as just a lowly steward was to write a book and tell the truth. But I guess some people take issue with the truth.
Now, was this was an actor?
He is an actor, a so-called actor. That's Jim Belushi, Tom.
So you're being sued by Jim Belushi?
Well, I'm being sued by Jim Belushi and his team of lawyers, but
over something you say allegedly have. I
have
to say
neither
alleged.
here nor there. I mean, but it's causing quite a commotion with the book, and it's been pulled from the shelves until they can settle the lawsuit. So, of course, I've been a little bit out of sorts the last month. So I apologize for. Hopefully, I'm not bringing the show down.
No, it's interesting to kind of get an update of where you're at, because everybody heard the interview. We actually played a
did you?
clip. Yeah.
Yeah. I certainly hope it wasn't the Belushi segment, because that will, I assume, cause me more problems legally. But
no, it was not that segment.
Well, good. But he is suing, and well, hopefully we can work it out, and hopefully we'll win in court, and that's our aim, and then we can get the book back on the shelves where it belongs, so that people can read about my experiences having sex in the skies. Yeah,
I mean, it's really, the stuff that you read from the book really is captivating stuff. It's really, you really revealed a whole side of the airline industry that I had no idea existed.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people were in the dark about it, and well, actually, as well, since our interview about a month ago, I guess you could call it a slip. As you know, during the interview, I pledged never to work as a steward again.
Mm-hmm. That was something you were pretty steadfast.
Because of course, the deleterious lifestyle. I hope you know what that means. I use big words.
Well, you're an author.
No big deal. And, so a couple of weeks ago, of course, I was reeling from the suit and the whole Belushi fiasco, and, well, I guess I turned back to what I know best, which is stewarding. And
oh, I'm sorry, because I know that was something you were pretty dead
I was
set
pretty
against.
adamant about never returning, and as you know, I had committed my life to writing, and
I mean, were you working on a follow-up to Upright Positions, or?
Well, I was writing a more personal story. I mean, a more, not exactly a piece of nonfiction. I was working on a fiction book, and
Okay.
I had started that about 3 months ago, and it was about a steward, but it was fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also about a sex-starved steward,
Mm-hmm.
but more in a fictional sense, not exactly my story, but a story that, for everyone, a fictionalized story of me.
Okay.
And I had to put that on hold, of course, because I did return and got reinstated at a major airlines, and
I mean, did you find yourself falling back into the same lifestyle?
well, it was an interesting story because I thought for sure I was going to go up and just do my job and just be a steward, and I had known that from writing the book I had learned a lot, and I was not going to repeat the same mistakes that I made, and I was adamant about that, and I went and I suited up, and I felt emotionally strong, and I boarded the flight, which I now live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it was a flight from Detroit to Nashville. So it was a short flight, and I felt very confident that I was going to get up and just do my thing. And everything was going great, and I started off fine. I felt very strong. I felt very emotionally secure. I felt like I could just do my job as a steward, and I'm sorry, Tom. I'm a little bit emotional.
Well, what happened?
Well, everything was, like I said, going normal. We had just hit the runway, and we had done our safety announcements, and we were doing our final cabin check and our cross check. And the rest of it is pretty much a blur. I mean, I had found myself in the back lavatory with an electrical engineer named Roger and a chef from Houston named Frank Costanti having sex. And
I'm sorry. It's as though you really got back into the industry that you...
The whole thing, to me, Tom, is like a huge blur. I mean, I didn't even know it happened, but it did. I was there. It was me. It was Ron Garver, and I was doing the same thing I was doing that I had written about, that I had thought I had purged from my system, and apparently I didn't.
So,
and,
well, if the book has been removed from stores, I guess this is like a new chapter to the book.
Well, I suppose. I mean, I didn't want it to happen this way. I certainly didn't want to travel that road again, and apparently I did. But I'll tell you something. I drew more strength from that experience, and I guess it was serendipitous, but I now found that after that flight, I quit, and I stopped.
Okay.
And what I did do is find an amazing, magnificent friend in Frank Costanti, who is
the chef,
one of the top chefs in the country. He works out of Belmondo's in Houston, Texas, and he is a 4-star chef and the executive chef there, and we are going into business together now.
That's fantastic. So there is a new chapter to your life then.
I guess there is, and I guess what it does tell me and should tell everybody is that in life you have to keep taking falls and then keep picking yourself back up.
Yes.
And the fact that you picked yourself back up doesn't mean that you're going to not fall again.
No.
Which I did.
Yes. And
I think it's a little bit like Jesus Christ or one of those people like him who makes mistakes and then it gets rewarded for those mistakes.
Well,
so we are going into business together, and I am uplifted by that, even though this whole lawsuit has been a huge blackish gray cloud that's been hovering over me and raining and having electrical storms over me.
Well, Ron, I really appreciate you calling in and being part of the program tonight. It's good to get an update from you.
Well, let me just plug what we're doing. It's called Last Meals, and I'm taking a little bit of what I did for with the airline industry, which of course I have a background in food service, and Frank, who is an executive chef, and we're starting a business called Last Meals, and that is catering to people on death row.
Really?
Yes, who are afforded one last meal, and that last meal typically is not that fantastic, even though they can request whatever they want. They don't get the best possible meal they can eat. And what we're going to do is start a national program, a service for all the penitentiaries, for people on death row, and serve them the best meal they could possibly have.
As their last meal.
As their last meal. And just so you know, we're inaugurating our first one on Monday morning, which we're very excited about. Which is
who?
He is Andrew Cocorales, and he is on death row at the Maynard County Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois, for rape and murder. And Andrew is a huge fan of the cinema, and what we're going to do for him is prepare at 4:30 in the morning on Monday morning the exact duplicate of Wolfgang Puck's menu for Oscar night. And we're really excited about that, and that is going to be served to him at 4:30 in the morning, about 2 hours before his lethal injection.
So he will have had a chance to see the Oscars, and then before he gets...
We spoke to Andrew about it, and he is just absolutely stoked and cannot wait. And he is going to have the best meal of his life. Not only is it going to be well prepared, but it is going to be, like I said, an exact duplicate of the Oscar menu.
Well, that is fantastic.
Which is a baked potato with caviar to start, a seared medallion of veal, along with a half roasted lobster with a port wine sauce, all on an artichoke puree. And then
you're making me hungry.
Instead, I know. I mean, it's fantastic.
Well, let me just give it just 1 second, Ron. 800-989-9368 is the phone number to call and pledge to the WFMU Marathon, or you can pledge on the internet at WFMU.org.
And, Tom, the pièce de résistance in the end, of course, as you know, is the traditional chocolate Oscar, and what we're doing is doing a chocolate syringe, just as a little bit of a nod to his situation. And
now, you don't think that's tasteless at all?
Andrew knows it's coming. And Andrew loves it, and Andrew has a sense of humor.
Okay, well,
and what he's going to be thrilled with is great food. About 2 hours before he passes on, and goes to hopefully a better place.
You know, I really you've opened up a new door which I really want to explore with you.
I would love to talk about this further because we're doing more of them, and there is already plans to do meals for people in South Carolina on death row.
So why don't I have why don't I give you a call and we'll set up another interview?
Absolutely, I would love to talk further about this because it is important. And like I said, look, I'm not political and I'm not active politically, but I think we're doing a good thing here. And I'm no fan of the death penalty. I don't even support it.
Okay.
But what I do support is great food and if you're going to die and you are afforded a last meal, you should have the best. You shouldn't have some bucket of chicken from Popeyes. You should have the best possible meal you could have.
I support your efforts. Well, thank you, Ron, for giving us the update.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, and hopefully I can stay out of the skies and not have sex with everyone.
Okay, well, we'll talk to you very soon.
Okay.
Thanks, Ron.
Bye-bye.
All right, good night.